Good evening. Hope all of you are doing well. Tonight we're learning Maseches Beitzah Daf Lamed Dalet, and we're starting about 10 lines from the bottom of Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis at the two dots. We've been discussing a collection of halachos that were stated in the previous Mishnah. That previous Mishnah is on the bottom of Lamed Gimel Lamed Aleph, and one of them, as quoted here, is Umegabe Mina Chatzer, that one, according to the Tanna Kama, at least, is allowed to collect sticks and twigs to be burned that are strewn throughout the Chatzer. And the Beitzah here is going to quote something quite similar to our Mishnah. Tana Rabbanan Megabe Mina Chatzer Madlik. The Tanna Kama is of the opinion, as is our Mishnah, and this Beitzah matches, that one is allowed to collect twigs from their field, no problem at all. Shekol Mashu b'Chatzer Muchan, who we presume that anything that's in your Chatzer is considered to be muchan without any restrictions of the halachos of muksa ubilvad. But however, one needs to make sure shelo yasa tziburin to tzaburin. One should make sure that they're not making piles. That's inappropriate. And Reb Shimon Matir, that's what the Beitzah says. So the Gemara here analyzes this Beitzah. What's the machlokes of can you make piles in your chatzer and can you not make piles in your chatzer? But my kimiflage. So Mar Savar Mechse de Kamachnif Lemachal Yom Acharina. What the Tanna Kama is concerned about in regards to making piles is that maybe one who's watching you would assume that the piles that you're making are for future use and they're not for today. And that would be usher. It's not usher what you're doing. It's the perception of what you're doing might be usher. And Umar Savar, the Shita of Reb Shimon is not that way. Savar, K'dei Rasa Mukchas Allah. When they see that you're standing there with the pot, they know that you're going to collect firewood to burn the pot. This is a very interesting halachic discussion of if you see the context, does it work? Like, so we have a din in Shulchan Aruch, the Ramah quotes is that if a person's eating chalav shkedim and you're drinking it with milk, you're drinking it with meat, so then you're supposed to put some shkedim on the table. Eva, it's almonds, there's nothing wrong with it at all. But that's what the Ramah writes. But let's say people nowadays, we have a very clear context. You just ate steak. Now you have a coffee with coffee creamer in it. Do I have to put out almonds? I have to leave the container out. Why don't we look at the context and say, this guy's a frum person, this woman's a frum, just that obviously it's part of a creamer, but we don't do that. We typically assume that so that's what the Gemara is dealing with over here is, does context matter? If you're holding a kli, which everybody knows that you use to cook on Yom Tov, isn't it obvious that you're making a pile in order to cook? So that's what the machlokas is between the Tanna Kama and Reb Shimon. The Gemara says 5 lines from the bottom in Motzina Saor that one is not allowed to create fire, and our Mishnah listed a whole host of different ways to start fire, but it's not allowed. My time mishum de kamolid b'yom tov. Molid is a halachic terminology that one is not allowed to create something new on Shabbos. There are poskim who say that it's different than nolad. Nolad is when something happens on its own. Molid is when you make something. These are differences in language. Nevertheless, it's usher because the kamolid b'yom tov, and that's why we light multiple day candles, or we light from candle to candle to ensure that on Yom Tov we're not lighting from a new flame. And of course, it's happened to us all where the fire goes out. You have to go to the neighbor, try to transfer the fire. Very difficult. Fine. But that's what the Gemara says, as molid b'Yom Tov is a problem. Ben malabnin and sarafim, one is not allowed to make libun, to make the tiles very hot. Maika avid, what's the halachic issue? Why can't you cook on them? We're dealing with a new product. And part of the problem with the new product, as we turn to the top of Lamed Dalet Amud Aleph, is mipnei shetzarach lebadkan. They need to be checked to see what their integrity is. Take a look at Rashi. Top Rashi on the page, Jubar Maskal shetzarach lebadkan. Im yuchlu lekabel libun. And if they can handle the heat, it's going to be sitting on the roof under the boiling sun in the Middle Eastern sun, 90 degrees, 100 degrees for many days in a row. Can it handle it? So they would test it. And what Rashi says at the top is that Hilkach b'Yom Tov lo, you're not allowed to do this on Yom Tov. Dilma pake, maybe it will crack v'yishtakach l'tarach shelo l'tarach, and then retroactively it will be that you did something that was a tircha, and that's not allowed. And it's only here do we view it as a tircha because here it's likely that it will crack. Now this is very different than our construction. We don't have to test ours by sticking them in a fire. We basically have a clue. The materials that we have such overarchingly, they're built so well. So this is one concern that the Gemara says of Rabbi Bar Bar Chana ve'amrei la, and some say that wasn't the reason why there was a restriction on heating up the tiles, but rather ve'amrei la mimnei shetzarach lechasman. It wasn't that we needed to check them; it's that we needed to burn them again to make them still stronger, and it was a process of strengthening. So the Gemara then is going to ask a question. Tanan Hasam, we have a Mishnah, and what does the Mishnah write? Darsa o shetarfa bekosel. If there's a bird that was stepped on or that was pressed against a wall, o sheritzatz behema, or that an animal stepped on this bird, umifar cheses, and the animal's still alive and moving around. V'shah samei eis la eis v'shachta, and you waited 24 hours. In general, in halacha, When we say me'es la'es, it's a 24-hour window. So then the halacha is kshera that animal is kosher. We're 4 lines down, lamed daled amud aleph. Just a fascinating din of me'es la'es. This comes up in bris milah all the time. When there's a baby that, God forbid, is sick. So normally the rule is like this. When a baby is born, even 1 minute before Shkia on a Monday, the bris can be any time on the following Monday. And Zrizin Makdim, and the earlier the better. However, if a baby is sick and the bris is pushed off, then the count is not like that. Then the count is not mixas hayom kekulo. The count is 7 days me'es la'es. So from the time the baby gets a clean bill of health, if it's 10 a.m. in the morning, the bris cannot be earlier than that 10 a.m. slot the next week. So let's say the baby was put in the NICU, and he's released on day 5, and the critical issues of his health dissolved on day 5 at 4 p.m. The bris cannot be before 4 p.m. 7 days later. It's an unbelievable halacha. That's another application of me'es la'es. So this bird waited 24 hours and then it was shechted. The halacha is that it is kshera. And the Gemara continues on line 4. But this animal, we can't make any assumptions about it. We need to check it to make sure that it's actually going to not have any trefas, because the animal was crushed and thrown against the wall and stepped on by an elephant. It's got a lot that it needs to be worked on. So we can't just eat it. We have to check it. So says the Gemara, wait a minute. He says, hold on 1 second. I understand during the week this animal can be checked, no problem. But on Yom Tov, are we allowed to shecht this animal? Why? What's the problem? Would we make an assumption that there's a reisa, that there's a flaw in the animal, that it has some type of mum from all of the trauma that it underwent? Oh, do we say, oh, no, we just treat it like every other animal? So Amar Leh, hold on 1 second. Tanina, we learned this in our Mishnah. What did we learn in our Mishnah? We're not allowed to warm up the tiles. Why not? Because when we analyzed our Mishnah, we said my kavid. And what did Rabbi Bar Chana say? That the reason why in our Mishnah that we didn't allow the warming of the tiles was because tzarech lebadkan, because you're not allowed to do things that require badika. So if that's true, then what about the bird? Then maybe on Yom Tov we should not be allowed to shech this bird because it's a bird that's tzarech badika. It has a reisa because something happened to it, something traumatic happened to it. So that's what the Gemara says. Amarle, no, lav dafka. Anan, we are not of the opinion that the restriction in our Mishnah of warming up the tiles is because shetzarech lebadkan on, and we're in the camp of, quote, mipnei shetzarech lechasman, the sheet on the top line of this amud of lamed daled amud aleph. We're of the opinion that the concern is not about warming it up to see if it will break. We're not concerned about that. We're just saying you're not allowed to warm it up only for the purpose of strengthening it. So therefore, problem solved. Anan, mipnei shetzarech lechasman mas nisan. That's how we learned our Mishnah. Good. That's one section of the Gemara. Next, we're about a quarter of the way down on Lamed Daled Amud Aleph. Tanya, the Beitzah writes, Echad mevi esa or ve'echad mevi esa eitzim ve'echad shoves sakdera. One person brings the fire, one person brings the wood, one person brings the pot. Ve'echad mevi esa mayim, one person brings the water. Ve'echad nosein b'socho tavan ve'echad megis. Another person puts in the spices, and still another person stirs the pot. So this is a famous halacha, kulan chayavin. Everyone is going to be held accountable. Very well-known halacha about Hilchos Shabbos. Tanya, the Beitzah writes elsewhere, Acharon, Chayev, V'chulan Pturin. So this is a big stira. You just said that you got a clown car. Every person who comes out of the car does one piece of the cooking. The first guy he sets up the pot. The second guy adds the water. The third guy adds the spices. The fourth guy puts the wood down. The fifth guy lights the fire. So that's a machlokas in Beitzah as to how many people are chayev. The first Beitzah we learned painted the picture that everyone is chayev. This last Beitzah that we learned said that no, only the last one is chayev. Answers the Gemara, lo kasha. This is not a stira. Halfway down lamed daled amud aleph, ha de icy or meikara, ha de icy or lebasov. It depends when the fire was lit. Oh, such a rational thing to say. If you bring a pot, but you haven't done anything with it, if you bring water, even if you put in the spices, even if you bring the wood, but there's no fire, so how can you say that anyone is chayiv? You haven't done anything yet. You, in a vacuum, are innocent.
Can it be a separate malacha that you're not supposed to do?
What malacha have you done?
Well,
You put spices in a pot. Okay, say there, but that's not our concern. We're talking about bishul. When this is framed out of Maseches Shabbos, it's only a question about bishul. And we hold all of these people accountable. But here in Beitzah, the Gemara makes a distinction, and it says, "Ha da'isi or meikara." When do we say that everyone is chayiv? That's when the fire is already lit. then the guy who puts in the spices, the guy who puts in the wood, the guy who puts in the water, you're all in violation of halacha. But according to the Beitzah that says that only the last guy is going to be held accountable, that's because he's the shmendrik who lit the fire and cooked everything. But everybody else was pater. I'm not saying it's mutter, but they're all pater. There's no isur d'oraisa. Says the Gemara, hold on one second. Bishlam, I understand in the case where we said that everyone is chayiv, in the case where the fire was lit first and then everybody came along and added another element. There I understand. Kulhu ka'avdi ma'aseh. Everybody did something, ella, except for one person. Shovesa sagder my ka'avdi. The guy who brought the pot, it's made out of metal, made out of earthenware. He puts it over the fire. What has he done wrong? Why is he chayiv chatas? Why? Well, he didn't do anything. There's zero bishul took place because of him. But do we say that he enabled the guy who added the water? How far does this go? It says the Gemara, Amar Reb Shimon ben Lakish hacha b'kdera chadasha askinan umishum libun re'afim naguba. Oh, no, what the Gemara says is the reason why the person is chayiv is because of makeh b'patish. She took this pot and it was brand new. It wasn't yet finished. And when he put it on the fire, he violated tikkun mana. He violated the issur of making a kli. And that brings us to yet the next sugya.
Bishul is not the problem at all.
For him. For him.
But for everybody else.
For everybody else, it's bishul, correct. Yeah, we have to parse out because otherwise, and let's just say the case the other way. Let's say the pot has been used 100 times. Then he's putter. He hasn't done anything wrong. But in this case, that's the Gemara to create a new kimta to understand the Beitzah because the Beitzah makes no sense. I understand if the fire is on and you're the guy who put the wood in and you're burning wood, usher, I understand. You add water to the pot, bishul. You add tavlin to this pot, bishul. I mean, it'll kli rishon. We paskin in halacha that a tavlin are allowed in a kli sheni. So that means, for example, that you're allowed to put salt into a kli sheni. So the poskim discuss this in regards to chicken soup, whatever, any kind of soup, I guess, but typically chicken soup. Does the ladle count as the kli sheni to make your bowl the kli shlishi? Or do we say no? If the ladle is so hot, it's piping hot, let's say if it's made out of metal, so metal holds a lot of heat. Well, it doesn't hold a lot of heat. It gives off a lot of heat, so it's very hot. So then really maybe your bowl's a cliche. Okay, can I put salt and pepper inside that? That's a shiur in the poskim. That's a shiur in halacha. So the most lenient shita in this world is the shita of the Rav Yosef Dov Alevi Soloveitchik Zatzal. He was of the opinion that you're allowed to drink tea on Shabbos, even in a klisheni. It's extremely mechudash. My family does. We don't drink tea. We don't make tea on Shabbos. When people in our house ask us for tea on Shabbos, we're like, oh, it's like a little awkward. Like you put the water out and then you put a tea bag on the table. Am I allowed to even do that? Like if I hold that it's usher, is at least neighbor, but the Rav holds that it's takamutter. Why does the Rav hold it's mutter in klisheni? Because the Rav believed that tea leaves were considered tavlin. They're considered spices. Think about this. Parsley, dried parsley, oregano, they're leaves that are dried and used as spices. My nafkamina. The Rav says it's a spice like anything else. So the Rav says you can make tea in a klisheni because tavlin in the klisheni is mutter. So then there were a couple of people in Rav Shechter's shiur. Rav Shechter was a tam. They said, oh, that's beautiful. I want to follow that shita. He said, great. If you want to follow the Rav shita over here, take a deep breath. And you have to hold all of his shitas because he does not think like everybody else. So we don't go shopping for kulas. You find your Rav, you ask your shilas, and you move on. But that's an application over here. Says the Gemara over here, his isser that he did over here is very simple. It's that it happened to have been a new pot. And when he placed it on the fire, the heat of the fire completed, as it were, the pot. And therefore, that would be problematic a little bit more than halfway done.
Why they're all blamed because you can cook on Yom Tov.
This is Shabbos. It's painting a picture here of a different question. It's just out of, you're absolutely right. It's not a Yom Tov sugya. It's a Shabbos sugya. This doesn't, you could cut this out and put a Maseches Shabbos, it would fit perfectly. Yeah. So it says the Gemara, Tanur Rabbanon, another din. Tanur v'kiraim, two different types of ovens chadashim, if they're brand new, on the same note, because the tiles is what's led to all of this. Are we allowed to heat things that will be improved by their having been heated? So harehein kekli kikol hakelim hanitlim b'chatzer. It's mutter to move them, no problem. You can use them as a box, that's fine. However, aval ein sachin osam b'shemen, ein sachin osam shemen. It wasn't uncommon to kind of put one layer of oil on it before they would use it the first time. Vein tashanos and b'matlis, you shouldn't be wiping it down with a towel. Vein mafiganos and b'tzonin kedel chasman, you shouldn't be, we know this now, that the way you can like temper metals is extreme flip of temperature. We know that hardens metal. We know that, but they knew that too. So they said over here, let's say vein mafiganos and b'tzonin, if it's boiling hot from the cooking process, can you dump very cold water on it kedel chasman to harden the metal? Not allowed. But if any of these things were needed in order to actually bake, that's fine. That's fine. Not a simple din because it contrasts with what we learned earlier. Need be shown him to understand this. Next, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbi said, Mulgan es harosh ves haraglaim. One is allowed to be molig. To be molig is to pour boiling hot water on the animal's shechted already. Is to pour boiling hot water on the head and feet of the animal. It's a place where there's a lot of hairs and feathers. We've all seen the chickens that have not yet been cleaned well enough. And also, umehavhevin oso beor, you are allowed to singe it in fire. I've seen people do this before, like professional chefs will do this. They have a whole chicken and they'll turn on a fire. And whenever they see remnants of the feathers, they'll just hold it next to the flame and it'll just singe right off, just totally gone. I've seen people do that. Aval, ein toflin osan, you're not allowed to cover this bicharosis, which is lye, below ba'adama with earth, below basid, which is some type of plaster, and all of these were ways of removing hair from the chicken. So some of those were not allowed, and some of them were. The water was allowed and the singeing was allowed, but not with any of these pastes. Vein goes as an osan b'misparayim. You're not allowed to use a pair of scissors. This is very interesting. Halacha l'maisa in the Mishnah Berurah, I think the Mishnah Berurah discusses using a pair of scissors on Shabbos. And from what I've learned, one is allowed to use a pair of scissors on Shabbos as a klisha malachto le'isser. So let's say you have a package, sometimes the bags of salad that we buy, you can't tear them open, like something magical happened in the process of making the plastic bag. You can tear all other kinds of plastic, but you can't open a salad bag without a pair of scissors. So minus all the issues of cutting letters, let's assume you're a good cut. So then you could take a scissors because it's klisha malachto le'isser, no problem. But here he says that it's not allowed. And if you have a shearing scissors, as we would call them in our language, you're not allowed to use that to cut up certain vegetables that would have benefited. Aval, there was a certain type of vegetation. These were very difficult foods to cook. And Rashi here, he compounds this by saying that there was a lot of tircha to cook it. Nevertheless, they were matir using it. It must have had a special role in the cooking process of Yantiv. Might have been something special. Umasikin ve'ofen be'purne. One is allowed to cook in a very large oven. Umechamen chamen be'antiki. One is allowed to heat up water in a very large water container that would be our modern day version of an urn. Ve'in ofen be'forni chadasha. One is not allowed to cook in a very large new oven, shemativchas, lest it crack. It hasn't been tested yet, going all the way back to the beginning of our sugya today. And that brings us to yet another sugya before we get to the next Mishnah. Tanu Rabbanan, 7 lines from the bottom. The rabbis teach us in a Beitzah. Ein nofchen b'mafoach. One is not allowed to, we know these things that are used that when they're kind of V-shaped. Yeah, for the fireplace. They're like a leather. They have a bag in the center and you open it, it draws in oxygen. And when you push it out, it blows out oxygen and it helps a fire to grow. So the clee that's, I can't remember what it's bellows. Yeah. Okay. So whatever, that's not allowed to be used. Aval, nofchen b'shvoferes. You can take a straw. That's allowed. It has to be done b'shinun. You're not allowed to fix a skewer. That's not allowed. You can also not sharpen it. Tana Rabbanan. One is not allowed to split up a piece of wood in order to lay it down on the bottom of the oven so that the fish that's being cooked there, the salted fish, won't burn. This one's allowed to crush up nuts inside like a garment of some kind, like a napkin of some kind. And if it tears, we're not concerned about it. That brings us to a new Mishnah, which starts at the bottom of Lamed Daled Amud Aleph. We're going to be wrapping up until about a quarter of the way down on Lamed Hey Amud Aleph. We're going to push a little farther tonight, because if you look at the next blot, you'll see that the bottom of Lamed Hey Amud Beis is pretty big, as is the next blot, pretty big. Okay. So we're at a new Mishnah now. Let's hold cup. There are some subtleties here, and we have to stay focused. Says the Gemara, Ve'od Amar Rabbi Eliezer. What's Ve'od? So Rashi points out that the previous Beitzah, the previous Mishnah that we learned had a kula of him as well. And if you look back at the Rabbi Eliezer in the Mishnah Lamed Gimel Amud Aleph, he's the one who allowed for the toothpicks to be made. Okay, so the Mishnah here says, V'od Amar Rabbi Eliezer, Omid Adam ala muksa. A person is allowed to stand over that which is muksa. In this case, we're talking about dried fruit. Erev Shabbos b'shvis, when it's Erev Shabbos during Shemitah. That's this year. V'omer mikan ani ochel lemachar. And you can say from somewhere around here, I'm going to be taking some of these foods tomorrow, and that prepares the food to be eaten. V'chachamim omer ma'ad sheyirsham v'yomar mikan ve'ad kan. And you need to put up, flags. You need to be able to be very clear as to what exactly you plan on eating. So the Gemara is now going to present two sources and then ask a question. Now
Are we talking about the owner of the field or just anybody's stomach?
It has to be someone who's allowed to eat it. But
isn't it all hefta anyway?
well, there's no meiser on it is the point. So you're allowed to eat it, but you have an issue of muksa because it's not dried yet. So because it's drying now, it's drying overnight. So before Yantif, you say, I'm going to on the roof, I have a 10-foot by 10-foot section of drying fruit. Tomorrow I'm going to take from there. That's the Tanakama. And the machlokas from the Chachamim is it's not enough. It's insufficient. You have to cordon off exactly what you plan on eating. This front right corner, whatever it is, you have to be just more specific. You're right. There's no meiser. That's correct. And it has to be eaten care, whatever all the halachos are. But correct. The Mishnah assumes that we know what we're talking about when it comes to Shemitah, which by and large is not true. And I include myself in that. Lamed Daled Amud Beis, third line, the Gemara opens with two sources that imply opposite things. And these two opposite implications will then lead to a question in the Gemara. Tanan Hasan, we have one Mishnah that says as follows. It was a time where the figs were being harvested, and Tinokos, there were some children, Shatamnu Ta'in in the Erev Shabbos. They took some of the figs and they hid them. They hid them and they were playing with them in the sand. They were just throwing them around. The shachachu, and by the time it all came to pass before Shabbos, below Isro, they had not taken Meiser yet. But Motzei Shabbos, by the time Shabbos is over, lo yochelu ela im kain Isro, then you're not allowed to eat them until Meiser has been taken. The subtlety of the Gemara here is that one is not allowed to eat be'arai. One is normally before something has been me'usar, we're allowed to eat be'arai. Here we're not allowed to eat be'arai, but that's very strange because this food never made it into the house. And when the food is not roa pnei habayis, that is what's called eino gemar malachta. That means that it's as if the harvesting is not yet done. Why? It's a very unique din, and we'll have to see why this is the case. That's source number one. Source number two, 6 lines down, Lamed Daled Amud Beis V'Tznan Nami. We also have another brayso. Hamavir tehinim b'chatzer lekatzos. If a person is laying out figs in their chatzer in order for them to dry out, more reliable weather than here in Chicago. So banav uvnei beso ochlen mehen arai. They're allowed to eat be'arai. Upturin, and they're currently pater from the chiyuv of meiser. So these two juxtaposing mishnayos, they're not juxtaposed in real life, just here in our Gemara. They are not mishnayos that are next to one another. But it says the Gemara based on these two sources as follows. I don't understand. The first case was about Shabbos. The second case was about Chatzer. It seems to be that the case of Shabbos, even though the food was never brought into the house, it was never roa pnei habayis, but still we said it's chayiv and meiser, and you're not even allowed to eat be'arai. Yet in the next case, when it was in a chatzer, it seems to be that eating be'arai is mutter. So it says the Gemara as follows: V'aminei Rav Rav Nachman, Shabbos Would we say that Shabbos is just so powerful that even though it's true that this particular food was not gemar malachta and it wasn't roa pnei habayis, it really shouldn't yet be chayiv and forbidden to be eaten araish? Maybe Shabbos is just so powerful that it is that way. Miyam Rinan, do we see that since we have a pasuk that by Shabbos the food has a din of oneg, therefore kava, it instantly becomes in the status of inedible, even be'arai. Even for something which is not nigmar, even for a food that was not roa pnei habayis, it's not yet shayach, it's not yet chayiv in meiser, it's not even done being harvested yet. Odilma, or perhaps would we say 1/3 of the way down, but davar shenigmar malachto kava, it actually would not be forbidden to eat be'arai unless it's nigmar malachto. The food would have to be brought into the house. And bedavar shalom nigmar malachto lo kava. And had it been that the food was not nigmar malachto, then lo kava, it would not reach the end point of its processing to the point that it would be asur to eat. Which one is it? Amar Le, Rav Nachman says back to Rabbah, Shabbos kovas. Shabbos is powerful enough that even if a food is lo nigmar malachto, even though it never made it in to the house, it was not roa pnei habayis. Shabbos is strong enough that bein bedavar shenigmar malachto, bein bedavar shalom nigmar malachto, whether or not the food made it into the house, we're going to say that you're not allowed to eat it be'arai. Shabbos is so powerful. Amar Le, but the other brisa compared it to Shabbos. Ve'ema, maybe we should say that Shabbos is dumya dechatzer. That was the second Mishnah that we saw as the Gemara opened at the top of this page. And machatzer, just like by a chatzer, we see that eno kovas el b'davar shenigmar malachto. when the te'enim, when the dates are being laid out inside of the field and inside of your chutzner to be dried out, there it's not kovea unless it's nigmar malachto, unless it sees the roof of your house. It's roa pnei beso. Af Shabbos lo tikbo el b'davar shingmar malachto. I have a marimakom. I have a great marimakom that tells me that maybe by Shabbos I should distinguish and say that only when it's nigmar malachto does it actually work like that. So it says the Gemara, Amar le limud aruch or Talmud aruch, depending on your girsa. The Kisvei Yad have it as Talmud Aruch. Kind of makes a little bit more sense in regards to our language. Talmud Aruch, we have an open Gemarahu, Biyadenu, in our hands, Shabbos Kovas. And when we say Shabbos is Kovas, that is Bein B'davar, She Nigmar Malachto, Bein B'davar Shelo Nigmar Malachto, whether or not that food is Ro Pnei Abayis, it's really completed its entire harvesting process. Whether or not that's the case, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Once Shabbos happens, the food is usher to be eaten, even Be'arai. Omar Mar Zutra, let me try and bring a proof here. You will see that this won't work, but he's going to cleverly try to bring a proof from our Mishnah. Omar Mar Zutra bred Rav Nachman. Avona nami tanina. Now look, by the way, just look who's talking. This is his son. This is Mar Zutra beret de Rav Nachman, and Rav Nachman was the one who gave the answer. So his son is piping up. Could you imagine at the Shabbos table, Tati, I have a Mishnah for you. Which Mishnah is it? It's our Mishnah, Maseches Beitzah. What does our Mishnah say? V'od amar afana nami tanina. We're 2/3 of the way down, a little bit more. Lamed Daled Amud Beis. V'od amar Rabbi Eliezer. Omeid Adam ala muksa erev Shabbos b'Shvius. That was our Mishnah v'chule. So let's learn our Mishnah with his diuk. Taima. The reason why in our Mishnah we said you could eat be'arai was because the Shvius la bar isurehu. Because during a year of Shvius there is no meiser. It's no meiser to be given. You're not allowed to give meiser that year. You're done. And what does that imply? That it's only during the year of Shvius that it would be mutter. Habishar shnei shavua. In the other years of the week, literally that's how it's translated. But shnei shavua means the other years of Shemitah. Hachinami de aser. It should still be the case that it's aser. My taima. And now Mar Zutra finishes his argument. Doesn't that mean la mishum de Shabbos kova? Doesn't that come to show you that Shabbos is koveya? Because we see that in all years that are non-Shvius years, the implication of our Mishnah is that it would be usher to eat that food. Exactly like my father, Rav Nachman, wanted to say. Beautiful argument. Says the Gemara, 4 lines from the bottom low. You totally mislearned that Mishnah. Doesn't say who's talking, but you can imagine Rav Nachman looking at his son and saying, Zis, my sweet boy, you learned the Mishnah wrong. Lo, shiny Hassan, that's a different case. Why is our Mishnah not a good enough source to learn that Shabbos is koveya, to restrict us from eating food be'arai? Because Kevan de Amar, what does our Mishnah say? Our Mishnah says, Mikan ani ochel machar, kava le'ilave. Because here he said, this food I'm going to eat when it's ready. So you made it ready. That was your Gmar Malachta, and you're done now. And therefore, you cannot bring a raya like Mar Zutra wants. So Ihachi says the Gemara, if what makes something kavua is saying that it's going to be eaten, Ihachi my ir Shabbos afilu b'chol nami. The halacha should be the same during the week as well. This is not a simple concept. You can take a look at the very long Rashi at the bottom of the page. But this basically the Gemara is saying that this should apply during the week as well. If just choosing that something can be completed, therefore it's completed, which should be true on a Tuesday as well. It says the Gemara, Kamash Milan, the Gemara teaches us an ancillary halacha. What does it teach us? The tevel muchanhu etzel Shabbos, that if you have a food that's tevel, that it actually could at some point be edible. How so? On the very bottom line, Shim Avar V'tikno, that if a person violated halacha and actually was misake in the tevel, they brought meiser, the halacha is mesukan, that the food is actually going to be considered edible. Now, on the very top of Lamed Aleph, on the Lamed Hey Amud Aleph, and we're going to again go about 10 lines down or so, 12 lines down, just to get to the end of this first approach, and then we'll stop. The Gemara raises a concern. The Halo Mosaru Chozer. Halo Mosaru Chozer means that if you have food that can be put back into the original location that you took it from, so then the halachas change. How do the halachas change? The Shamin on the Rabbi Eliezer the Amar Kol Hecha the Mosaru Chozer. Low kava, that if a food can be put back in its original container, so then there's no keva, there's nothing that establishes it firmly as inedible, and therefore we shouldn't say that it's usher to eat arai. It should be mutter to eat be'arai. Ditznan, what does the Mishnah say? The Mishnah says as follows: "Hanotel zeisi min ha'ma'atan," a person who takes olives out of its container, out of a vat. The halacha is tovel achas b'melach v'ocha. You're allowed to take one at a time. That's not a problem. V'im tavel v'nasan lefanav. The word asara should be removed. V'im tavel v'nasan lefanav. If you dipped it and then you put it on a plate in front of you, that looks like a meal already. Now you're not. That's not normal. In that case, chayev. That is going to be chayev in Meiser. That's not right. What does Rabbi Eliezer say? Rabbi Eliezer Omer, he says something that's a little difficult, and the Gemara is going to push on this. He says, Min hama'atan tahor chayev. If the food that's taken out of a vat is from a tahor vat, then you are going to be done for, you're chayev. And min hama'atan tameh pater. That if you take it out of a tameh vat, then you're going to be pater. Mipnei shehu machzer esamosar. Because in this latter case, you're going to be pater, meaning there's no keva. It is not considered completed in its harvesting process because you can always put it back. Behavinan, but how did Rabbi Eliezer make the difference between the vat being tahor and tameh? Maishna resho, maishna seifa. Why is it that when it came to the vat being tahor, we said that you're going to be chayev, but the vat being tameh, you said you can put it back and you're going to be pater? The Amar Rabbi Abo, 7-8 lines down on Lamed Hey Amud Aleph. Amar Rabbi Abo, Reisha b'ma'atan tahor v'gavro tameh. In the Reisha, where we said that you are not allowed to put the food back, and you would therefore be chayev, and there is a kviyus of the process of tevel. That's because the food that came out was tahor, but you are tameh, so you can't put it back because you made it tameh. So now it can't go back in the vat. However, Seifa says the Gemara, we're dealing with a vat that's tameh and a person that's tameh. They're all the same halachic status. If he touches it, if he doesn't touch it, it's still going to be tameh. That can be put back, and that's the matzi mahadarle, and therefore we see that it can be returned. So that's our Gemara's question. It's a bit of a sophisticated question, but the Gemara's question is as follows. You said that there could be a kviyas, but why should there be a kviyas if it's possible that that item can be returned where it came from? If you take a fig off of the roof and you can put it back, that's not called kviyas. You said that it's called kviyas, but it's not. We see from Rabbi Eliezer that it's not always called kviyas. So the Gemara answers, the case that we are dealing with, the case in our Mishnah that we're dealing with is the case of Shabbos Shvius, that whole case that we're dealing with at the Mishnah on the bottom of Lamed Daled Amud Aleph, wrapping up to the top of Lamed Daled Amud Beis. That is a case, as the Gemara says, where you're dealing with tahor food, but a tameh person, where you're not allowed to, where you're not able to return it. And we're going to end our question with the next 4 words: v'halo muchzarin ve'omdenheim. What does that mean? It means that if you look at the case that we're dealing with, all the food is literally just sitting there on the roof. It's not even moving. It's not even like there's a shaila of can we be machzir the food. It's still sitting in its original spot. So how could there ever be a shaila of kviyas if you never pick it up? You want to argue that if you pick it up, maybe you can put it back, maybe you can, fine, I understand. It's just sitting on the roof. I have a whole section on my roof separated out for drying vegetables and fruits, whatever it is. I haven't even moved it yet. But according to your approach, that as long as it's returnable, there's no kviyas, then certainly if I never pick it up, there's not going to be a kviyas, then we should never be chayiv, and it should always be motor to eat, all right? And the Gemara ends with this rejection of our first approach. And tomorrow, starting at Ella, nearly a third of the way down on Lamed Hey Amud Aleph, we'll pick up with the second approach here. And we're going to stop for right here and wishing you all a beautiful night.
It seems like you're exempt either way.
What does that mean?